Welcome back to Starkiller Base. Today we have a very special video for you and a start of a series. Today we are going and doing the analysis for cards from the Spirit of the Rebellion, starting with red villains. So let's get underway. The first card we have here is the Death Trooper. It is one of the new non-unique red villain characters. It has 10 hit points and costs 10, and it has 4 damage sides, which is pretty fantastic. It's definitely a marked upgrade over the First Order Stormtrooper. It doesn't have 2 blanks and that sort of thing. It's got an extra damage side and some more hit points, but of course it costs more. It can pair well with Director Krennic at 19 points, or maybe an IG-88 or something like that. Or you can go another way and go for 3 Death Troopers in a deck. The only downside to these guys is they don't have a resource side. So if you're running something like logistics in your red decks normally, it's going to be a lot trickier to trigger them in this one. One thing that's fantastic about them, of course, is I know the feeling when my opponent plays endless ranks on me and brings back a First Order Stormtrooper. Imagine for that same 5 resources if they brought back a Death Trooper, which has more hit points and a better die. So that could be really ugly. Next, we have FN 2199. He's a fantastic character as far as I'm concerned. He's 11 hit points. He's a 10-13, which is basically the same stats as Kylo Ren. His dice are actually very similar to Kylo's as well. They have 3 damage sides, so they have a 1 range instead of the special. But other than that, the dice are pretty much the same. But what makes him really shine is his ability. His ability reads, after you play a weapon on this character, roll that weapon die. If able, you may immediately resolve it. So you can put a weapon out on this guy, roll the weapon die in, get a resource, a couple of damage, whatever it is, resolve it. And then he's still ready, so you could actually activate him later on in the turn and roll that same die in again along with his character dice. I was watching the Hyperloops play, what was it? It was Unkar Plut, FN 2199, and a Night Sister, all non-elite of course, and they had something like 24 weapons in the deck, and then Cheat and Boundless Ambition to draw your hand back up to full in the middle of the turn. And they were playing against a Poe Maz deck, and I believe it was 2 out of the 3 games that they played, Poe was dead turn 1, because he was able to play out a weapon. He was able to use Unkar's ability to get a few extra resources, roll in the weapon, resolve the die, and if it either did damage or if he got resources, he could play out another weapon. And if he didn't have the money for it, he could just overwrite a weapon with a weapon, roll the die in, and by the end of the turn, FN 2199 had 3 weapons on him. I think they were 7 or 8 cost in total. And then he was able to roll in FN 2199 with his 3 weapons and just destroy whatever was left. It was real ugly. I was thinking about running FN 2199 Elite with the Vader Dark Apprentice. That way you have access to red and blue for the control abilities and the dug-ins and that sort of thing. And you could do some pretty serious damage. Both of those characters have a lot of damage sides. So hopefully we won't see broken decks with people recycling weapons on top of themselves over and over again and killing people in the first round too much. Hopefully there'll be some answers to that. Obviously, card discard would be great. And then the fact that the character pretty much half mills himself in the first turn. If you can have some characters survive the first turn, then they'd be in a pretty bad position from that point on as far as their deck size goes. So next we have Director Krennic. He's cruel but brilliant. He has 12 hit points. He's a 15-19, so he's pretty expensive. One of those characters that you're probably just going to put a 10 coster or something like that with him. He pairs very well with Elite Balatique, because Elite Balatique is 11 points, which means that you're up to 30. You've got 4 character dice. And then after you activate the character, if you control the battlefield, you get to roll in a Death Trooper die into your pool on top of that. So it effectively has 5 dice, which is something that we haven't seen before. Now his dice are a little bit against what I heard was supposed to be the trend in the Spirit of the Rebellion, in that most dice were going to be more consistent. His dice are sort of jack of all trades, but they do have a lot of 2 values and focus and that sort of thing, which isn't bad. So, I mean, if you roll the disrupt when your opponent has no resources, or the discard when your opponent has no cards, they don't do very much, but he's got a lot of hit points and he can fix his dice and run, commanding presence and that sort of thing pretty well. So he should be pretty interesting. I was watching Severn Gaming Network and Christian was playing Elite Krennic, Elite Balatique, and he was able to just destroy, I think it was a Rey Padawan deck I think he killed Ray turn 1. Between Krennic and Balatik and that Death Trooper die, if you have the battlefield, you can roll in up to 10 damage without any upgrades at all, so it can get really ugly really fast with that one. I'm definitely looking forward to trying him out in a deck. And lastly here we have the TIE Pilot, which is another non-unique. It is 8 costs and has 7 hit points. It's sort of like a First Order Stormtrooper, but a bit more expensive. The die sides are really interesting. It has 3 modified range damage sides, and one of them is a new damage side that you haven't seen before, which is a modified pay side. But what really makes this guy shine is his character ability. It reads, while this die is in your pool, your other dice showing range damage cannot be removed by an opponent. So if you have 5 dice showing range damage out, whether the TIE Pilot die is showing range damage or not, your opponent can't dodge any of those other dice. He could dodge it and remove the TIE Pilot die if it had range damage, but nothing else, which is pretty scary. Now, one thing to keep in mind, of course, is it says it cannot be removed by an opponent. So let's say that you had a TIE Pilot die and it was blank, and you had a couple of jetpacks that were at +3, and you had a single range damage die. Your opponent could play something like use the Force to turn it to a blank. That does not remove it, so it would go past the TIE Pilot's ability. But a lot of things like Electroshock, and he doesn't like you and that sort of thing, are the ones that do remove the die. And if you can't remove the die, it's actually pretty hard to deal with. So I've heard of a lot of people looking at doing sort of like a 4 First Order Stormtrooper deck, but modifying it to have 2 First Order Stormtroopers and 2 TIE Pilots in there. And it fits. It's got the same number of health. It has endless ranks. It's got the same resource sides and that sort of thing. So it could get really interesting because you can't mitigate any of that damage, really. If you are playing against that deck, as much as you want to kill the TIE Pilots to get rid of their ability, I think that it's a better choice to kill the First Order Stormtroopers because they have 3 unmodified range damage sides and can really turn on that TIE Pilot dice. Whereas if the TIE Pilot dice are the only thing that are left, they're not doing any damage unless you've got some unmodified range damage from an upgrade or a support or that sort of thing. Speaking of supports, a neat little flavor thing in my mind is that the TIE Pilot works really well together with a First Order TIE Fighter because it has so many unmodified sides. So that's kind of cool. So next is another card that actually synergizes pretty well with the TIE Pilot. It's a new support, the E-Web Emplacement. It's a 3-cost support. It reads, while you control the battlefield, the value of each of this die's sides is increased by 1. So without the battlefield, it's still pretty good. I mean, it's a 1-1-2-2 for damage sides, but with the battlefield, it becomes a 2-2-3-3, which is pretty huge, especially for 3. As long as you can afford to pay for the sides, and you've got that battlefield, then this can get really strong. And I mean, even 3 shields is nothing to laugh about. If you're playing a deck with tons of hit points, like 3 Death Troopers or 4 First Order Stormtroopers, having 3 extra shields on something is pretty huge. I mean, that's pretty much 50% of a First Order Stormtrooper's health pool. I'm not a big fan of supports still, but hopefully the Spirit of the Rebellion will change my mind on them. There's a few that I do like, and we'll talk about one of them soon. Next, we have Imperial Discipline. This one here is a villain upgrade that is very reminiscent of something like Promotion. It's a 1-cost upgrade ability, red character only, and has an action. Remove this die to turn one of this character's character or upgrade dice to a side showing range damage or a resource. Most red villain decks are looking for range damage and resources, so that is pretty good. You can play this out early, get a bit of extra damage off it, get a shield, get some resources. It's got 2 resource sides, and it can fix your dice if you've got a blank or that sort of thing. So it definitely helps your deck ramp up if you can see it early game. And on we are at the DT-29 Heavy Blaster Pistol. This one here is a 2-cost ranged weapon upgrade. It's got 3 damage sides, which is pretty good. 2 of them are modified, but they're 2s, which isn't too bad. And then it has a special, which is kind of interesting. I'm not a big fan of the special, and I don't know how much this is going to see play. It says remove an opponent's die showing a resource cost. So, you know, if you can hit it, sure, it's die control. It doesn't cost you anything to remove the die. But the thing is, a lot of the time, your opponent's got a die showing resource cost that they can't afford to pay the resource in the first place, or they may be playing a deck that doesn't really have any resource cost sides. I mean, if you're playing against like a Vader Royal Guard, there's what, lightsabers and maybe the Mind Probe 3 range damage there. It's interesting. I don't think it's going to replace the F11D or the Holdout Blaster, but If you're running a red villain deck and you don't want to go more expensive with upgrades, you can take out your IQAs and put in these bad boys instead and see how it goes. I mean, +2 and +2 is not bad. It goes really well with the Death Troopers and the First Order Stormtroopers and that sort of thing. So, moving on, we have the big bad boy here, the Z6 Riot Control Baton. This is a signature weapon that you've seen in The Force Awakens when FN 2199 faced against Finn. And it is definitely not disappointing in Destiny. It's a legendary. It's 3 cost. It has 3 damage sides. It has redeploy, just like a lightsaber. And it says after you roll this die into your pool, you may re-roll it. So if you put this thing on FN 2199, you roll it in, you can re-roll it again before you decide to resolve it, and then it's back on the upgrade waiting for FN 2199 to activate. It's probably pretty hard to roll a blank if you can re-roll the die every time you roll it in. And you'll notice that it is very similar to a Grievous die, and Grievous is also a red villain. So if you had Grievous with a couple of these on him, he would be scary as heck. The other thing to note is that it is non-unique, so you can have 2 of these out at one time. It's sort of reminds me of a lightsaber without the special side, but it has a 2 melee instead of the +2 modified melee. So in that sense, it is better, and redeploy is pretty fantastic. So I'm definitely going to try this one out. Looking forward to getting a couple of them in my personal collection and put that into my Vader Dark Apprentice FN 2199 deck. We're going to move on here to the non-dice cards that come from Spirit of the Rebellion. First off, we have a 0-cost event called Battle Formation. It has Ambush. It says count the number of red characters you have. You may reroll that many of your dice. So first glance, it's kind of strange because you could just discard the card to reroll any number of your dice if you wanted to. You'd lose the ambush that this one does offer, but let's say that you've got 2 jetpacks out there and you've got 2 blanks on the First Order Stormtroopers or something along those lines, and you play this, you reroll the First Order Stormtrooper dice, you hit a black side, and boom, you can connect those jetpacks and do some damage. So it's definitely useful, but I don't know. I mean, I'd be tempted to put other cards in my deck, but we'll see. There's probably going to be some decks that can make use of this one. So next up we have the Imperial War Machine. It's a 0-cost event. It says resolve one of your red dice showing a resource cost for free. So it sort of functions like logistics in that it's a card that saves you a resource, but it would work better in decks that don't have resources, like a 3 Death Trooper deck that don't have resource sides. So you could still save a resource paying for your pay sides, but you don't have to have that resource side on your dice showing to use the card. Personally, I think that if I had a deck that had a lot of pay sides, I would probably just run the Rebel War Room battlefield instead, but maybe this can come in handy in some decks. Next we have Lockdown. It's a 0-cost event. It has Ambush. It says spot 2 red characters to take control of the battlefield, and this does not claim the battlefield. So essentially what that means is that the battlefield comes to your side of the table, but you don't get to do the claim ability, and it doesn't end your turn. If your opponent's running a deck that has dug-ins and defensive positions and that sort of thing, you can take it away from them and then they can't use them. If you have dug-ins yourself or other cards that take advantage of having the battlefield, then that can help you as well. There's a few places where the end of the game tiebreaker comes down to who controls the battlefield, so even in that case it's not too bad. And it has Ambush, so it allows you to play it first, grab the battlefield, and then use dug-in right afterwards or something along those lines. Next we have Sustained Fire. It's a 1-cost event. Play only if you have 2 or more dice showing range damage. Remove all shields from all of an opponent's characters. This one here is a bit conditional because it costs 1 and you have to have 2 range damage size showing, but it's very powerful for what it does. The reason it says remove all shields from all of an opponent's characters is because it's worded for multiplayer as well. So you can't remove shields of everybody's characters. You just pick one person and get rid of their shields. So if you've got a Han Rey deck across the table from you and you've got a couple range damage size showing, and you can remove all the shields from Han and Rey and then smack them the next action for 4 or 5 damage, it's pretty powerful. So next we have Traitor. It's a 1-cost event with Ambush. Discard the top card of your deck, then remove a die not showing a special that has a value equal to or less than the cost of the card you just discarded. So this one has a pretty hefty cost. I mean, it costs 1, plus you're playing the card, plus you're milling yourself a card. And it doesn't even work on specials. So if you flipped over the top card of your deck and it was a 0, because it's worded that you cannot remove a die showing a special, the only thing that 0 could remove is a blank. On the other hand, if you built a deck that had everything cost 1 or 2 in it, which would probably not be ideal, you could guarantee that you could get rid of at least a 1 value or a 2 value die when you play this card. I'm not a big fan, and maybe it'll work well in a deck that's specifically geared to do that, but it doesn't really seem all that interesting to me, or that powerful either. Next we have Trench Warfare. It's a 0-cost event. Play only if you have 1 or more dice showing a shield, and then turn any number of an opponent's dice to sides showing shields. This is pretty interesting, although I think I would prefer it in a red hero deck. If your opponent has a whole bunch of range damage sides showing, and you can turn 8 range damage into 4 shields or something like that, that's a pretty big swing. If you can manage to build a villain mill deck that runs red guys, then it can be really good as well, because you're getting rid of damage and you probably don't care too much about your opponent having shields. If this worked in a Padme deck, it would be fantastic, because all you do is care about staying alive and you're not really looking to kill your opponent. So it remains to be seen how useful this will be. And the other problem to it is, of course, that you have to have a die showing a shield out. And if your opponent has, say, some weapons that don't have shield sides on the dice, you can't turn your opponent's die to a side showing a shield. So it would just be, you wouldn't be able to mitigate that die at all. It would just be, if it was showing 2 damage, it's still showing 2 damage after you play Trench Warfare. Next we have Undying Loyalty. This is a 0-cost event. Heal 1 damage from a red character. If there's another copy of this event in your discard pile, you can spend a resource to place the event on top of your deck instead of discarding it. So this follows one of the themes that we see in Spirit of the Rebellion, where there are some cards where you should run 2 copies and it has an added effect if one of the copies is already in your discard pile. If you're playing an attrition type deck where you've got a lot of troopers or something like that that have endless ranks and you're just looking to overwhelm your opponent, this could be a fantastic card. My friend was playing a Phasma Trooper deck in a tournament the other day, and he apparently put this to some pretty good use, being able to heal himself over and over again. He was also playing on Tuesday at my LGS in a little mini tournament, and he was playing as a Padme Mill deck, and basically what ended up happening was it came down to the game where my friend here had 1 card left in his hand and was able to kill the last character on his opponent's board before getting milled. However, he triggered Undying Loyalty 3 times throughout the game and put them on top of his deck. So if he hadn't had Undying Loyalty, he would have actually been milled out the previous round or the round before that, so it saved his butt. So that's one to look out for. Next one is a really interesting card. It's a 2-cost event called We Have Them Now. Play only if you control the battlefield. Turn up to 4 of your dice to sides showing damage, ranged or melee. So this one is really powerful. Yes, you need to control the battlefield, but we see above it there's a card called Lockdown, which lets you take control of the battlefield. It has really not many limitations on it. I mean, It's a Trap requires you to use red dice. This one doesn't matter what color the dice are, and it doesn't even have to be ranged damage. It can be ranged or melee. Doesn't matter what's on your opponent's dice. It doesn't have ambush, but it's still very, very powerful. I mean, you think of a Django Veers deck where they can just take their 4 dice and fix them to be all 2s or something like that and whack you for 8. If you're running Tactical Mastery, you could play Tactical Mastery, play We Have Them Now, and resolve the dice before your opponent could do anything about it. There's also another neutral card which gives the next card you play Ambush, so you could play that card and then play We Have Them Now, which gives it Ambush, and then resolve the dice afterwards. So it's definitely one to look out for. If your opponent's got 2 resources and has the battlefield, keep an eye out for this one, because it can be devastating. Next we have a card called Attrition. It's a 1-cost support that I'm not too sure about. It says after one of your characters is defeated, deal 1 damage to a character. So let's say best case scenario, you're running 4 stormtroopers. You've got 2 of these out and you are running endless ranks. I mean, it definitely does what it's called. It's a battle of attrition. If you kill my stormtrooper, yes, I lost my guy, but I just did 2 damage to you, which means that you're that much closer to being dead. And if I can bring him back with endless ranks and do it again, then you're taking more damage. I'm not sure that this is going to find a home in many decks, but there could be some decks which will be fun, which could make some use out of it. There's another card, I believe it's a neutral, which is after a character is defeated, you gain a resource. So you could run these together and just be damaging your opponent, getting money off of them dying. So, you know, if you got 2 resources every time you lost a trooper, you're paying, that's 40% of your endless ranks right back again. So who knows? Lastly, we have a very interesting card called Imperial Inspection. It is a 0-cost support. There's a number of supports like this that I really like in the Spirit of Rebellion, where you don't have to use it as an action. It's just sort of an after ability. This one says after one of your dice rolls a disrupt, you may exhaust this support to return an upgrade in play that costs 2 or less to its owner's hand. So what's cool about these kinds of supports is that you just roll your character in, and if you happen to roll a disrupt, you exhaust it, and boom, you do the ability. You don't have to choose to resolve the disrupt die. You don't have to do anything like that. If you're running a deck that's doing choking, Krennic, Death Troopers, Unkar Plut, that sort of thing, they've all got lots of disrupt on them. You could build a deck around this thing, and you know, being able to disrupt your money and take away upgrades that you actually did play up before I could disrupt your money is pretty brutal. And I mean, if you get a jetpack returned to your hand and you don't have 2 resources to play it back out again, you've just lost a die, and your game is pretty slowed down. One thing that's interesting about this one also is that it doesn't talk about an opponent specifically. So let's say that you had a character that was about to die and you didn't have redeploy on your upgrade on it. You could use this to return that upgrade to your hand and then play it out again on another character instead of losing it when that character dies. So I hope you liked our analysis of the red villain cards from Spirit of the Rebellion. Keep an eye out in the coming days for some follow-up videos, which will have, of course, the other characters and the other cards in the set. So if you like this video, please let us know in the comments below. If you've got any suggestions, we'll take them there too. Give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll keep bringing you Destiny content. Thanks for watching, everybody.